Good morning. My name is Kobe Speros, and I'm here with Maddie Spalding. It is June 9th, 2022. We are at Flagler College, and we are here with Dr. Liz Ibarrola. Liz, if you wouldn't mind spelling your name out for us.
My full name is Mary Elizabeth Ibarrola, so that's Maryelizabeth, and then Ibarrola or Ibarrola is Ibarrola.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry, I have difficulties rolling my R's. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with some of the biographical questions I was talking about earlier.
Okay.
Now, where and when were you born?
I was born in Easton, Pennsylvania on January 15th, 1992.
Okay. Now, if you're comfortable talking about this, could you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Sure.
Where you grew up?
We moved to Virginia when I was 6 months old, to Richmond, Virginia, and then from Richmond to West Palm Beach, Florida, technically Wellington, Florida, when I was 4. So most of my memories growing up are from West Palm. Grew up in South Florida. I went to St. Anne's Catholic School. I have 3 siblings, and spent a lot of time swimming and reading and playing with friends. Pretty average suburban childhood.
Okay. Now, what brought your family to Virginia?
Well, so when my parents got married, they decided that they wanted to raise their children in the United States. My father's Mexican, my mother's American. And so when they moved to the U.S., my dad had to redo some of his residency. So he was a practicing doctor in Mexico, but coming to the U.S., he had to redo some of that training. And there were definitely challenges along the way, including some pretty racist people that ran residency programs that he ended up at. So he ended up kind of bouncing around from residency program to residency program until he finished in Virginia. So that was really about his work and completing the training that he needed to do to have, proper accreditation in the United States. But then we wound up in Florida because, he was doing interviews for jobs, places that were looking for surgeons. And Florida and Texas were the places that were interested in having bilingual, Spanish and English speaking surgeons.
Okay.
So can you tell us a bit about your education background?
Mm-hmm. I mentioned before that I went to St. Anne's Catholic School, and then after 5th grade, I had auditioned and I went to a performing arts school, Bach Middle School of the Arts. And then for high school, I also went to a performing arts school, Dreyfus in West Palm Beach. And then after high school, I decided not to necessarily pursue music. I still did some in college, but I went to school just based on looking for a small liberal arts school where I could study abroad, where I would have lots of individualized attention, and I wound up at Rollins College. And then from Rollins, I went straight into grad school at the University of Florida.
Now, regarding your education, did you have any mentors that really helped foster you along the way that took a special place in your life?
Not particularly. I would say that I remember distinctly my 3rd grade teacher is the first person who introduced me to archaeology, Ms. Silvers. We had a project on ancient Egypt, and so that was momentous for me. And then in my undergrad, my advisor and my advisor for my honors thesis was Jonathan Walls. He is an archaeologist who works all over the place, really, but at that time he was mostly doing work in East Africa and in India on the African diaspora. And so I'd say that he was the one who introduced me to historical archaeology in particular, and to, maroon archaeology in Florida. So I think I reflect more on maybe people that like sparked my interest in certain places.
Okay.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got started with the Fort Mose project?
Sure. So in grad school, I had first, when I applied to grad school, I had been interested in doing research on maroons in Mexico. And I wound up at Florida, and my committee said, based on the instability in the region that you're interested in doing work in, based on the time commitments that it would take to really get settled there, do work, it might make more sense to work in Florida for now. And so I said, okay, sure, I can do that. And so my work in Florida was a little bit based on what my advisor, Dr. James Davidson, was doing here, but kind of doing a comparative study with maroon archaeology in Florida. So using the data from Terry Weich's research at Pilicacaja in Sumter County. And then I knew about Fort Mose through doing that research, and I was interested in working at Fort Mose, and we had started working with Dr. Lori Lee, while we had done 4 summers of work at Bulow, and then that 5th summer, Lori joined us there, and she had an interest in working at Mose too, so it was a little bit of like a meeting of interests. I had an interest in working at Mose, Lori had an interest, Davidson had no opposition certainly. And so, we got started talking to Kathy and figuring out, is this an appropriate project to be pursuing after that?
So when you were first starting to, gear up for working at Fort Mose, what was the most exciting prospect about that for you?
I mean, Fort Mose is just exciting in itself, everything, any and everything. And I think also, I was familiar with some of the materials that had already been recovered from the site, things like, belt buckles and a spoon handle and these really, and the St. Christopher medallion. And it was just really, material culture that just sparks so much imagination about what people's lives looked like, day to day. So I think that I was really compelled by the work that had previously been done there. And I thought, if we can build on that, if we can do more, even just more of the same, that would be fantastic. I think I also was interested in, what's the word I'm looking for? In expanding, right? Maybe, being able to, because work had been done there previously, we didn't have to start from zero. So that was an exciting thing about Mose. Not only was it this really compelling site and there had been compelling work done there before, but that also meant that we were building upon something, and that's building upon something in terms of research, building upon something in terms of community interest, right? We already know that people care about this place. So in a lot of ways, the fact that it wasn't, it wasn't starting from scratch meant something, I think, it meant good possibilities.
Okay. I would like to go back to something you said earlier about the artifacts that you're finding and how they sort of reflect the daily life of the people that inhabited the site. How would you describe the importance of that in building the historical context?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point because, Dr. Landers has done so much detailed historical work, right? Looking at the archives, we do know so much about people's lives without digging, like, right, why dig? What's the compelling evidence there? I think one of the most exciting things to me is finding the variety of sources of materials. So, I've analyzed the ceramics, and there's clearly no preference for Spanish ceramics over anywhere else, right? They're buying from whomever, and it doesn't matter that they are technically enemies of those people, right? So something like that isn't going to be in the archives, right? There's not going to be a record of every single thing that people bought, and used in their daily lives. To be able to dig that up archaeologically, is something exciting. I also think that, like, looking at the minutia in a way that can't be seen in historical records is interesting. So we had, like, the Turlington's Balsam of Life bottle, right? So, I mean, we can know, of course, that they had to have, some kind of provisions here, but thinking about the specific choices that people made in purchasing, or what their preferences would have been, I think is really cool. Finding the creamware teacup this year and being able to say, like, wow, this would have been purchased probably right before they evacuated. And so to think about, we can use archaeology to think about the way that, like, life was so dramatically disrupted, right? Whereas, an evacuation on paper is just like statistics, right? It's just like this many people moved from this place to this place, right? But archaeologically, we can see, like, what that disruption might have meant.
So you mentioned the creamware piece. Is there anything that any artifact that you found that really sticks out to you and has just changed your perception of the site?
I don't want to put too much on any one artifact. That's a little difficult, but I do think, the Turlington's Balsam of Life bottle definitely, maybe it doesn't change my interpretation of the site, but really solidifies the importance of certain themes when we think about the site. So this bottle is, like, something that would have been expensive. It was, like, the high quality, like the name brand product. And so I think it's really meaningful to recognize that the folks living out at Fort Mose, they weren't necessarily there 100% of their own choice, right? They hadn't wanted to return to the fort. They were, getting delayed rations, like, things were difficult day to day, but they also had such capacity to, choose to buy something together, or to, choose to invest in this thing that they thought would be protective. I'm sorry, the alarm is going off for the water break. Should I fix that?
Yeah, it's all fine.
Okay, I think Heather's gonna get it.
No worries. So to go back a little bit earlier, you mentioned engaging with the community as part of the goal of the project.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the perception that you have witnessed in the community?
Sure. For me, engaging with the community is really important. That was something that I wanted to do more of as a doctoral student, but really didn't have, not the opportunity, but it didn't happen. And so it is very important to me to, like, think about engaging with the community, but there's, like, many levels of the community. So I think you're asking about the public in some ways. So I'm first and foremost interested in working with those people who have already, like, made investments in the site, like people who have done research there, people who have, been reenactors there for 20 years, these folks who have really shown, like, demonstrated this interest and continued to come back year after year. I don't know, like, I can't point to anything that I've been involved in for 25 years, right? And, that's partially age. But I think that I'm interested in, like, why people commit to a thing. And so in terms of, can you say the question again?
What would you say your understanding is of the public perception
Okay.
of the site? Yeah.
So I think there's like a divide between those people that I was talking about who have been invested, who have done all this work for so many years, who really are celebrating the significance of the site, and the general public who doesn't know anything. You know, there's some people on the cusp there who visit the site and they're like, oh wow, fantastic. And there's so many people who never even get to Mose, who never go the 2 miles up the road to Mose. You know, I talked to the used bookstore owner, you know, in town here the other day, who's lived here for years and years and has never been to Mose. And it's just, you know, I know everyone is not super engaged by history. You know, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but you just hear that over and over, that people have never even visited. And I really think that's a shame, given the significance of the site to, I mean, world history, to Florida history, to US history, and also all of the work that's done there, you know, in telling the story of the site. There's so many people who are invested in telling the story. I think, you know, they should be heard by more people.
Okay. So with that in mind, you know, that's a part of the project that we're, you know, trying to do now with the oral history is to tell that story from the perspective of the community, so that other members of the community can see that. But then that begs the question of how do we get the rest of the public to see that so that it's visible for them? How do you think we could make that visible to everybody?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of ways that we can do that, and it's not going to be like a one-stop shop. I think things like providing clips of the interviews and making sure that they can be used on like the social media by the Historical Society, or you know, Samuel Proctor disseminating them as like a regular part of, you know, their database of, you know, oral histories can be useful. I also think that through the interviews we can identify these, you know, places within the community. Like I think today you'll probably talk to Dr. Israel about young people, right? And so identifying those particular places where we can help to forge connections, right? By getting people to talk about this work, and, you know, by getting people to talk about, like, you know, who they think they can reach, maybe we can provide an avenue for brainstorming about the next steps. Because they're obviously already working on that, right? They work very hard on, you know, outreach. That's like what the Historical Society does. That's what most people, you know, involved with, you know, Fort Mose are doing. But if we can contribute in a little ways by like preserving what's been done and talking about plans for the future, then maybe we can, you know, be a catalyst for like, okay, well, this project is definitely one that should be focused on, or we can, you know, provide additional support, you know, in this way, XYZ. Yeah.
So in terms of like young people and community outreach, as you were talking about, how do you kind of envision like the students who are currently working on Fort Mose to kind of go forward and spread awareness and kind of attention to the site?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I imagine that some students, you know, through being Flagler College students, are going to take another public history course, right? Or maybe they can be an intern for the site, or, you know, do some work on social media for the site. You know, there are some students who are going to have specific connections, like, and continue to be very closely connected to Fort Mose. But I also think that not everyone is going to do that, and that's okay. And that we should also think about, you know, using this as a model, as practice for doing the same in other places, right? For, you know, connecting different aspects of the community together in, you know, the next place that they live or the next project that they work on. So I see some students having, you know, very specific continuity in the project, and other people, like, it's okay that they, you know, go on and use these skills and this experience as applied to somewhere else.
So how do you envision kind of the future of the Fort Mose Field School itself?
It's a good question. I mean, so next year we'll have essentially the same setup. So for at least one more year, it'll look this way. What's important to me is that we, you know, continue to seek funding for students and continue to think about, you know, like a broad base of training, right? Making sure that you're not just getting archaeological training, but you're also doing stuff like this, like oral histories. So I don't really know what it looks like after next year. I think it's important though that it continue in a sustainable way. I don't ever think that the field school needs to be some giant, you know, massive field school with 20 students at a time. What's more important to me is that we're training, you know, people in a sustainable way, right? Being able to mentor and follow through and like fulfill your needs for, you know, for any student who comes through our doors.
Okay. Now, with that future-oriented goal in mind, what advice would you give to a student or a community member on like an individual basis, one-on-one? What advice would you give them?
For what?
About you know, the future of the site and how important it is to the community here in St. Augustine.
I think, I mean, just based on my own work in like community organizing, I know that you have to find the thing that works for you, or like you have to find the place where you are most effective and think about longevity. So I would say, you know, no one who is part of a community project is able to like tackle an issue by themselves or solve it, you know, in 5 years or something, right? That, you know, any student or community member, like anyone involved in a project, you know, whether it be for Mose or somewhere else, that they should be thinking about like, what is the specific contribution I can make, right? What are the things that I do well that I can add to this project because I'm not gonna be the only person working on it, right? How do I add to a team? And also, how do I keep adding year after year? Like how do I see myself contributing to this, you know, for the long haul?
That all sounds amazing and very insightful. So we really appreciate it. We don't want to take up too much of your time. You know, you're a busy woman, very active in the community. So, I mean, if you have anything else that you want to add?
No.
Okay, awesome. Then thank you for coming out and speaking with us today.
You're very welcome.
Of course.
Just to kind of reiterate what Speros said, thank you so much for your time. If you'd be available for another interview after this, we'd be really grateful to hear more insight about the site and for you to share more of your experiences.
Absolutely. Just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.